I'm Kristen from Sheer Goodness, and you know that I raise sheep, but I also run an apple orchard here on my farm. And although tomatoes are my #1 crop, apples are definitely within the top 10. Today I want to talk about a particular apple pest called the Eastern Tent Caterpillar. We're going to take a look up close right now. So here I'm standing by a standard Macintosh tree. It's an older tree. And you can see this silken tent or web on the crotch of the tree. So ways to identify the Eastern Tent Caterpillar is obviously the tent that it forms in the branches of the tree. Also, that caterpillar itself, which I will grab hold of one here. Let me grab hold of them. They're kind of quick little guys. Alright, so here's one. They're hairy, they're furry. They've got blue, orange, and black coloring on them. And of a particular notice is the white line going down the back. This is not to be confused with the forest tent caterpillar, which just has white dots along the back. So this one is a solid white line. Other ways to identify this Eastern tent caterpillar is the timing of year. So these will be forming in the early spring. So since I live in Minnesota, I notice these usually the second half of May. We typically will have apple blossom or bloom during Mother's Day, kind of middle of May. So I'm going to start seeing these tents shortly after that. These tent caterpillars are pretty much predominant in the eastern half of the U.S. Kind of Minnesota is the midline and heading on eastward. A few have been noted in Wyoming, Montana, and even Colorado, but mostly eastward. So the timing of the year and the visualization of the tents. And of course the way that the caterpillar has its markings. Of all of the apple pests, I find that the Eastern tent caterpillar is the least offensive, especially compared to, say, plum curculio, codling moth, and apple maggot. Those pests affect the apple fruit. These do not. The damage that these causes is they go out during the daytime and they forage and eat on the leaves, on the foliage of the plant. So you can see examples of where they've come out and have chomped away on the leaves. So they can actually potentially defoliate your tree. Now, they're not affecting the fruit, but it does put some stress on a tree to have the leaves defoliated. If the tree is mature and strong, it can take it. But a younger tree or a weak and diseased tree might not be able to handle the stress of being defoliated. So I would prefer to not have the tent caterpillars. Also, they're pretty unsightly. The tents are pretty ugly, to be honest. So, what are some ways to control them? I prefer to run my orchard organically, and I really don't like to use chemicals. It is an option to use chemicals on these, but if you do, you would have to do it early. So you need to get them when they're at a small size, way less than 2 inches. And you're going to have to get into the tent and spray into the tent. But I highly recommend not doing that. Especially in the springtime, you have the honeybees, bumblebees, your pollinators are pollinating those blossoms too. We really don't want to damage those other beneficial insects. Ways to control this. The best way I'm going to do is just grab the whole web with the insects in it and pull it out. We're going to throw it in a bucket and we're going to squash them. Some people will use hot soapy water. Some people will choose to drown them. You can bury them. You can bag them up. I think it's a little quicker and maybe a little more humane to just squash them. You can also torch them. And I know that's handy for ones that are way up high in the air to have a little propane torch and walk around and torch them. The problem with that we've done, and we tried that initially back in 2009, we torched them, is a lot of them will fall to the ground and we don't necessarily get all of them killed in the flame. And then they survive and then they crawl back up in the tree and start the process over again. So I didn't find that very effective, as well as I really didn't want to damage the branches with the flame either. So really the best method is just grab them, put them in the bucket, and squash them. Now the natural predators for these are birds and wasps. And we have a few wasps out here. We have plenty of birds on our property, but The problem is the birds can't get them when they're in the tent. They're protected in that tent. And clearly we have more than the birds can handle. Another thing we tried in the past was I used to have free-range chickens. And so I would grab these in a bucket and bring them over to my chickens. The funny thing about that is most of my chickens didn't like them. I would feed them to, so I had Brahmas. I really liked the Brahmas, the black Australorps. I had some Easter eggers, and they didn't eat the caterpillars. They were almost kind of scared of them. It was kind of funny. And the only ones that really did good eating them were the red stars. I kind of miss having my red stars around for that reason, but they did eat the caterpillars. But you could try feeding them to your poultry if you have any. So I grab my bucket, I have some gloves on, I'm going to go ahead and grab them. While I'm doing that, I want to talk about the life cycle of these. So these caterpillars hatch out in the spring, and they start forming the tent in the spring, and they grow in size. Once they reach full maturity, they will actually leave the tent and leave the tree. They will go find somewhere to spin a cocoon. When they spin the cocoon, they will pupate into a moth. That moth then emerges, and it only emerges for about 2 days. It's a brown moth. And that moth will mate and lay eggs, and the eggs will be laying on the tree of the apple branch again. The egg mass will be a shiny black mass on the apple tree limb. And that will literally sit there and overwinter until an entire year later when the eggs hatch and the whole process starts over again. So it's literally 1 generation per year, but keep in mind that that female moth can lay 150 to 350 eggs. So that's quite a lot. Another interesting fact is these little bugs are kind of social critters, and they will form together. So if an egg mass was laid here on the branch, and maybe over here on this branch, another egg mass was laid, in the spring they will group together and form one tent together. So that's kind of an interesting fact. So it looks like I've removed the entire tent with my hands. We just don't want to leave anybody behind. And now you can see in the bucket what this looks like. So this one, there's actually not that many caterpillars. What you're looking at here is frass. So all these little brown pellets is bug poop. It's their excrement, it's their poop. It's called frass. So that's, that is pretty gross. But you have their silken web material and all that other excrement. And there's actually not that many caterpillars in that particular tent. So before I squash these with a stick, I am going to go around and collect more tents throughout my orchard. I have hundreds of trees, so I do need to walk around and inspect the entire orchard. But I do feel that this is the fastest technique. So now we'll get some more examples that are higher up in a tree. Let's go. Now I'm up high in the air on a state fair apple tree, and here's another good example of a tent. This one has some smaller. So here's an example of the eastern tent caterpillar when they're smaller yet. Like I said, the maturity size is 2 inches. So here's some smaller ones. We'll open it up. There's quite a bit of frass on the back. Ooh, there's a lot of frass in this one. They've been eating good. And believe it or not, their little silken tent here is actually, it's pretty strong. It doesn't tear that easily. But look here, they've nibbled on the blossoms here a little bit, and there's definitely some damage that they are doing. So ideally, if you can get in here earlier, the better, and not wait until they're so big and the tents are big and they've done the damage. But it is certainly difficult to find the time sometimes, reality of life. All right. One down, one less on that state fair. Let's keep going. So here I'm at a red-free semi-dwarf apple tree. And what's really interesting about this one is it's unusual in that it's at the tip of the branch. Usually the webs will form in the crotch of a branch, like up here. And oddly, this one is at the tip. So this is pretty unusual. Also, they're right by this little apple fruit forming too. So here we go. Let's rip this one off. Look at all that frass. These are a smaller size here on this one. Actually, yeah, you can see how small they even start out. Take a look at that. On the underside of that leaf, look how small that one is. So they start out pretty small. It's just, typically you're going to notice them more when you're walking through your orchard, and they're the larger size, and the tents are larger. Interestingly, it's like they have a little bit of their silk webbing around this apple fruit, but it's not damaged. Like I said, they don't damage the fruit, they eat the foliage of the apple tree. So I would prefer this pest over the other ones, although we pretty much have experienced every pest and every disease on our orchard, so I'm pretty well versed on all of them, unfortunately. Let's move on. So here I'm at an apple tree. I'm probably about 20 feet up in the air right now, and of course, inconveniently, this tent happens to be at the very tippy top of this tree. So I'm going to be on the top of this ladder, reaching for this one. You can see it right here. Now, some of the caterpillars here have dropped lower, and I'm trying to grab them. Here's one stray one here that's left the tent and gone quite a ways away, so I'm grabbing him. All right, that one is done. So of course, and I can see up here, there's quite a bit of foliage damage here and here on the tip of this one as well. Let's see, looks like they traveled here. I see some there. And even a little bit as far low as right here. So they've pretty much gone from here upward. I don't see anything lower. So this one is good. Here we're at another tent. This is a rather small one. And they are outside of the tent right now. They're pretty quick moving. Ooh. Pretty gross. Oh, look at this guy here. Oh, yeah, see, there's one hiding right there. I would have missed him. Gotta grab that single one there. Just kind of camouflaged in there, doesn't he? Yeah, so let's kind of inspect the damage on that. All this here got defoliated. That's too bad. And of course, quite a bit of frass all over the leaves, but that was a quick and easy one. Here's a really nice big tent here. It has a pretty big width to it. You can see how wide that's spanning. This one almost reminds me of a hammock. It's so big, and if you look underneath, it's almost kind of sagging like that. It's so full. And you know, you look at this guy here, this would be your 2-inch, pretty, maybe not 100% mature, but pretty close to mature right there. Hard to get a hold of them with gloves on sometimes, but yeah, once again, look how close up that is. They're hairy little things. They can actually move pretty quick. It's not very fun when they land on your shirt and crawl on you. All right, this is going to be fun here, ripping into this one. Oh, nasty. Oh, these are some mature ones. So these are definitely, look how mature. That's a full-grown 2-inch one. So these are probably about done. Oh my goodness, the size of that one is just, that silk 10 on this one is especially thick. So much frass. It just amazes me how much frass is in there. And what I just find mind-boggling is that they live in their own frass. Most animals are not going to want to live in their excrement. So it's a little disturbing. Wow, yeah, that was a good one. That one was definitely, if you're a little squeamish, you know, when the tent is that thick like that, I can see it being a little bothersome if you're squeamish. It was quite thick, like a canvas almost. And that makes sense because this example here, they were very mature. Those were the full 2-inch. So these would probably be leaving the tree pretty soon, and today is June 1st. So they've had a good half of a month, if not more, of being out. So these size ones, they're ready to move on, go spin their cocoons, and carry on with their cycle. So those were pretty mature. Again, here's the damage. Going up this branch here. Actually, this entire branch, sadly, is pretty defoliated. And yeah, it actually looks like they did move forward quite a bit too on that branch up ahead there as well.
And there's one there.
Oh, am I missing one? It's pretty easy to do. Don't know if I can quite reach. I'd probably have to move the ladder here. But yeah, they can certainly do some traveling. And you look to the left here, these have been defoliated a bit. They've certainly done some damage. But looking at the fruit is untouched. Let's move on. Now we're at a semi-dwarf Enterprise apple. The Enterprise apple is really cool because it's a great storage apple. It keeps really long in the fridge. But as I get distracted talking about apples. So here, this tent here is medium-sized. It looks really full, so let's see what we find in here. Oh, what's interesting, look at that. You actually have some stink bugs on there, like the squash bugs. That's what it looks like to me is, wow, I wonder if they're a predator for that. Not that I'm aware of. I know the wasps will eat these guys. This one's a little bit harder to take apart. Their tent is kind of not as good on this one, but there's just so many leaves and it's a little trickier to grab this one. There's more nooks and crannies here, let me put it that way. So this one might take a little bit longer to tear apart. There is some smaller ones here. Once again, a lot of frass. My husband really likes the Enterprise apples, so we definitely want to keep those going and healthy. It's okay if I don't get every last bit of the frass removed, but we do want to make sure we remove every insect. Okay, again, that one is complete. Look at all the chewed up leaves. This example is so high up in the air that even with my ladder, I can't quite reach the top. So I'm kind of reaching at an awkward angle behind me, and I end up splattering some of the frass in my hair. It was pretty gross. A propane torch would be easier in this scenario, but what can I say? I'm dedicated. Whew. Check my hair, see if I have any curling on me. No. I just walked through the northeast part of my orchard, and I was really surprised that there were no tent caterpillars in that section. Now I came over to the east, and this is a row of Harrelson apple trees, and we just spotted one pretty good sized one right here, so I will grab that one. Take note of the tip of this branch here, and all of the defoliation that has occurred here. Just look at how tight, especially the underside here. Look at how tight their webbing is. It's so strong, actually. Just fascinating. Ooh, this is kind of a nasty one to grab hold of. Wow, that is full. Like, this is the size of my entire palm, and I can barely grasp. That's how large that is. Okay, so I see it's pretty much 99% frass. And as I get a little closer, yeah, so I actually think with this one that they've pretty much matured here and left the tent. So I think we're looking at a really old one right here that's been here for a couple weeks or more. And they have left the tent to go spin their cocoons, pupate into the moth, and again carry on with that life cycle. So that one was pretty much just frass. But it was very large and very full, so it had been there for a while. I've completed scouring my entire orchard for tent caterpillars, and I am done for the day. My bucket is semi-full, and I'm going to squash them. Let's take a closer look. They're not moving too much in the bucket. Like I said, there's options of burning them, burying them, drowning them. I'm just going to squash them with a wooden stick. So just to recap, a good time to go and collect them is in the evenings when they're in their nest or in their tent. The only reason I did this during the daytime hours today is it's been cloudy and rainy, so they have stayed in their tent. Typically during the daytime, they will go out and eat the leaves. They will return to their tent at night, or if it's cold and rainy, they will be in the tent where they're protected. I have my cat over here that's watching this. Actually, I have two cats. Two cats that are watching me right now. If you'd like to learn about other apple pests and other apple diseases, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I can certainly talk about orchards quite a bit.